Welcome to All Home Care Matters, the show where we discuss all things home care, with discussions on important age-related matters and topics. Brought to you by Enriched Life Home Care Services, the #1 rated home care provider in Michigan by Top Rated Local.
Hello, and welcome back to All Home Care Matters. If this is your first time visiting us here at the show, we want to say thank you for taking time out to be with us today. We appreciate how valuable everyone's time is, and that's why we try and make each episode here at All Home Care Matters something that will hopefully matter to you. Today, I am honored to welcome a remarkable guest, Cheryl Beversdorf. She's a military nurse and veteran, and also the host and producer of Aging Matters. Welcome, Cheryl. How are you today?
I'm just fine, thank you. I'm talking from Arlington, Virginia.
Wonderful. Well, hopefully you guys aren't having any effects of the hurricane coming through.
We are.
Yeah. No, it looked pretty severe when I was reading the news last night. Cheryl, I introduced you as the host of Aging Matters, but I want to kind of start with the beginning of your journey and have you share with our viewers and listeners a little bit more about who you are and what makes you who you are. I'm going to do a spoiler here. You are a Vietnam veteran as a military nurse. Talk about some of your experiences and kind of how you got to where you're at today.
Well, it was the late 60s, and I had finished nursing school, a diploma program in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm a Wisconsin native. And all of my roommates and folks from the nursing school era were married, and I wasn't. And so after working a couple of years in surgery in Milwaukee, I decided it was time to do something different. And at the time, the Vietnam War was going on. And I thought, well, maybe I could do something really interesting. I had been traveling in Europe, came home, living with my parents, and figured that was not what I wanted to do the rest of my life. And so I decided to go to the recruiter in Milwaukee and signed up to be a part of the Vietnam conflict, which was going on. Interestingly, the recruiter said, "Would you like to go to Vietnam?" And I said, "No." But she said, Japan, Camp Zama, Japan is the halfway point between where the soldiers are in Vietnam and going back to the United States. And she said, "We always need nurses there." So 1969, I signed up for becoming an Army nurse, spent about 15 months at Camp Zama, including working on wards, which were orthopedic, a lot of young men, and they were all men, coming back with amputations, malaria, other kinds of situations that had been brought about by the war. And then I spent the last 15 months of my 2-year tour of duty at Walter Reed Army Hospital here in Washington, D.C. And the thing that was really interesting about my time in the military, while I only was active duty for 2 years, some of the subsequent employment positions were in part due to my military experience. For example, I was a staff member for the Senate Veterans Affairs Committee. And there we talked a lot, and this was closer to 1979, 80. And we talked a lot about issues like PTSD and many of the other problems that occurred as a result of the Vietnam War. I was also the leader of the National Coalition for Homeless Veterans. Many veterans became homeless as a result of the conflict. And I think in general, I always have a great appreciation for veterans. At this point, only about 2 or 3% of our population joins the military or is part of the military, and yet our veterans do so much, our military does so much, and we need to have a good appreciation of both men and women for their service. In addition, I would also say that I'm proud of my nursing background. I did start out as in a clinical setting, so that was in a hospital setting where I took care of sick people. And quite frankly, early on, I discovered that I'm not very comfortable around sick people. And I decided it was probably time for me to do something else. So I went back to school and I got a degree in public health. And of course, public health focuses more on wellness. and disease prevention. And so that was very helpful. And then I also spent quite a bit of time in the association world. I ran 3 different health associations here in the Washington, D.C. area and one in Chicago, and learned a lot about policy and the type of work that they do. And I represented different healthcare providers, including optometrists, public health specialists, surgeons, and podiatric surgeons. And this, again, gave me an appreciation for healthcare providers. So kind of an eclectic background, but it helped to ground me in what I'm doing now with Aging Matters.
No, that's wonderful. And first, again, I know I've said this to you before, but thank you so much for your service and what you've done for the country and our veterans. I feel like they should be some of the first in line for support and help, because they do give the ultimate sacrifice and make themselves available for our freedoms. As a young nurse, Cheryl, and you're working, I'll call it, not necessarily a MASH unit, but, you're working in these military hospitals during a war conflict, and you're seeing people, albeit they're men and not other women, who are around a similar age as you, right? You're young. Yes. And you're seeing these, I'm going to call them boys, but they're men. You're seeing these boys come in with, a loss of a limb or, a trauma to the head. How did you handle that? I mean, because you're kind of thrown in, it's kind of baptism by fire. This is something most people never see at all during their life. And here, your first entry really into healthcare is this trauma-filled world. How did you cope with that? Did it affect you? It had to have affected you.
Yes. In fact, it was kind of surreal.
Yeah.
I mean, to keep watching these young men who would come in on the choppers, as we called them. I lived in the BOQ, and every day there would be a new group of young men who would come in their blue and white seersucker bathrobes in various states of health, as it were, or being wounded and this kind of thing. And it was like you were in this different world. And it wasn't just all of the working with these young men who are our patients, but it was the doctors, it was the other nurses, it was the other support people. And again, we were in a foreign country. Yeah. We were in Japan. And to answer your question, sometimes I got real homesick. I just wanted to go back to real life rather than this surreal area where it just wasn't normal, and we were facing things that and situations which were very difficult. And quite frankly, while I was disturbed, when I came back to the world, I was not treated as badly as young soldiers who had gone to Vietnam. And I always worried about their mental state, not only in terms of what they faced when they were in Vietnam. And again, I was in Japan, but what they faced in Vietnam, and then what they faced when they came home again, which is part of the reason why they ended up being homeless or, taking their lives prematurely. It was not a pleasant time.
Developing dependencies, and it's just I was not born during Vietnam, but I'm a real I guess history buff, if you will, and everybody sees movies and different things, and it's just I think it's different when you actually are in those shoes and you have to face it. The men, the women, they didn't have whatever you think of Vietnam is regardless, these soldiers and the staff like yourself, you guys didn't have a choice. You're not making these decisions. You're following the orders of what you're told to do, and you don't have a choice. So we'll move on, but I know you had shared something about your third grade teacher, Cheryl, that kind of identified something in a third grade Cheryl all those years ago. What was that experience about, and how has that also impacted your future experiences and journey?
Well, I think it was very prophetic. In third grade, for those of us who are of this particular age, of course, we used to get letter grades for our usual subjects like arithmetic and spelling and science and reading. But there was another section on your report card called deportment. And that was a way of your teacher telling your parents, how does your son or daughter act in the classroom? Well, my third grade teacher in the deportment section of my report card wrote talks, TALKS. And when my mom saw that on my report card, and she said, yep, that's exactly right. She does talk. And I think I have had that skill since that time. And it's continued to be a factor in my life. I'm an extrovert and love to talk with people. And I think that the fact that I do like to talk and bring out conversation with people was very, very helpful. A couple things that were interesting in my life that were unrelated to a career. Well, one was a career. I actually worked for a time at a public relations company and helped clients. But I also, after I got a second degree, which was in communications, and we can talk more about that if you wish, I had a little company. I formed a little company called Health on Stage. And because of my background and interest in educating people, I and another woman pretended we were little old ladies, or not little old ladies, but women who were getting together and would talk about particular issues of concern to women. And we did heart disease, we did osteoporosis, we did depression. And the idea was the two women would have this conversation. It was about 15 minutes in length. And then I would have a health educator or a nurse be available for taking questions afterwards about the topics that we had presented in our plays. So since I love theater, it was a fun time just to act in there as well as educate audiences.
Wonderful. So is that all culminate in you creating Aging Matters? Because I know Aging Matters, it covers a wide range of aging issues, and kind of like with us, you bring on experts and guests from various fields. In your opinion, what have you found to be the most pressing issues older adults and their families are facing today?
Well, and thank you. Yes, it was kind of a transition from women's health more to aging. And I like to say that there's really three categories. One, first of all, we have to remember when we talk about older adults, we're talking about everybody from 50 to 100. So that's quite a variation in terms of age. But the focus now, and needs to be more so, is on staying well. And how can we do this? Well, we preach about exercise, we talk about socialization, purpose in life, preventing falls. This week is Falls Prevention Awareness Week, nutrition. We talk about aging in place, financial readiness, adequate sleep, whether or not folks can drive. So this is kind of the first part that I wanted to focus on in terms of Aging Matters. But as we get older, there are more health issues. And what are some of these? Hearing loss, low vision, obesity, cognitive decline, stroke, medication use. Older adults are on a larger number of medications. Caregiving, that involves the family, and solo aging. Lots of folks don't have spouses or partners or what. So that's kind of the second tier, or the second category. And then the final is thinking about death. We don't like to talk about it, but we need to think about advanced planning. What is our financial situation? What are we going to leave? What is our legacy? End of life. And so those are kind of the three categories that I use to determine who is going to be on my show and what topics will be covered.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know another one, and there's just so many, Cheryl, as I know you understand that better than most. Access to care, and and access isn't always just, is there a doctor local or a pharmacy local, but a lot of, like, my grandparents, for instance, they were on a very tight fixed income, and thankfully they never had any prescriptions that would cost twice what they receive as an income in their retirement. But a lot of seniors face that. They can't afford to buy certain prescriptions, or it's not covered under their Medicare plan, or what have you. And they have to go without that prescription, or they're going to give up something else in order to get that prescription. And I always worry about that for seniors. Do you find that very often?
Yes, and in fact, thank you for mentioning that, because I think that an added dimension of that is that not only are older adults having to deal with cost issues, especially in long-term care, since Medicare does not cover long-term care or nursing home care. I think that the access to care is difficult in the sense of the lack of understanding of healthcare providers about the concerns of older adults. I think there's still, unfortunately, too much focus on what's the condition that somebody is coming in here to be treated for, or what body part are we talking about, the hip or the head or the brain or whatever, as opposed to looking at older adults in context. Because maybe a certain treatment might not be the right thing for an older adult. Maybe we have to think about end of life, and maybe we don't need to do that diagnostic procedure when a person is 85 years old. And it's unfortunate that, and I just heard about a survey that I'd be happy to share with your listeners about the fact that a very, very small percentage of medical students are required to take any kind of geriatric courses in medical school.
Yeah.
Lots have to take pediatrics, but fewer in terms of geriatrics. While our population is growing substantially, I don't need to tell you, and we need to think about geriatrics and what the needs of this older population are as they age.
At 110%. And I know we had a gentleman on not long ago, a good friend of mine, and he says he didn't coin the term, but I said I will credit him when I use it. When these families or these individuals get a diagnosis, especially with like a cognitive issue, like a dementia, that's all they're getting. He says it's basically diagnose and adios. They're not getting the support, the resources. How is this elderly woman, maybe she's not even that elderly, but she's in her senior years, is now diagnosed with a cognitive disease. She lives alone. The children live out of state, and the other children that live locally, they work full time. Where's the support and the resources for that family and for their loved one? And, people don't get outside of their silos. I had the head of a medical school on not too long ago. He's a tremendous advocate for dementia awareness and education, and his university actually offers free online courses for healthcare professionals and or family and the lay people to better understand it, and he's trying to incorporate it into his medical school more time than just, a week course, if you will, on these cognitive issues, and make it into an actual full course for a semester, because, you're having the healthcare professionals that eventually become a doctor, become a nurse, and the only education they're getting is just a small snippet. And then when they are facing this, like you said, with our aging population just multiplying in droves because of the baby boomers, they don't know how to help support these families and their loved ones. That to me is a pandemic in and of itself.
I think that an additional factor too is the oftentimes conflict between the adult children and their parents.
100%.
Again, it's a perspective. If you're only in your 40s or 50s or whatever, you can't understand what's going through the head of your 70 or 80-year-old parent. And even when it comes to, say, what we talked about earlier, end of life situations, mom and dad or dad may be ready to go. They've lived their life. Children, not so much. So when we start talking about the kind of treatment they should get in the hospital, or what should be done there for that parent, again, there's a conflict about, or even whether or not somebody should go to a nursing home versus staying in their own home. It's really hard to try to convey to our adult children how we're feeling about life.
Yeah. 100%. And, that's something, since we're talking about it, we always tell families, have a conversation with your parents. You still need to respect them and understand, they have been independent since they probably got their car keys.
Yes.
They are still capable. Now, I'm taking it for granted that they're not dealing with advanced dementia. they can still make their own decisions. Respect them. You may not agree with them, but just like the day comes when you will have children, you want them to respect your wishes. And, but knowing what your parents' wishes are, or even your wife or spouse, it is going to help you in the long run avoid, turmoil and conflict within the family. It's going to help your healthcare professionals have those conversations. They can be very light and, not real invasive and not aggressive, but just start a conversation, so that you do
Yes.
know what your loved ones want. So,
Right.
Starting from third grade to, your service, helping our country in Vietnam with, your work as a military nurse, to having your Health on Stage show, all these things. Is that what inspired you? Was Aging Matters just a matter of time? No pun intended.
Yes and no. I mean, I think again, we all go, we've just been talking about our stages in life. I'm no spring chicken anymore. And there were a number of factors as I began to think about Aging Matters. One, very practical, there was an organization just up the street from where I live called Arlington Independent Media, and they offered courses for people to produce their own radio show. I do also produce a TV show, but that's not going on right now, although I hope to do that again. But I was excited. I thought, wow. And in fact, I should share a funny story for those people in terms of your listeners who would remember. There used to be a guy named Charles Kuralt who was on CBS who went around interviewing people. So I thought, well, I can do that. And I can do that especially because of my nursing background. I was trained to ask people questions, find out what their situations are when I was in the hospital or wherever, and then figure out what, based on the kind of information that they gave me, what are the solutions? What do I need to recommend to the physician? What can I do myself? This was a very important part of why I thought doing something in an interview format would be very helpful. I've also discovered over the 8 years that I've been doing Aging Matters is that it's not just the older adults who need the care. It's what we just said a moment ago. It's those adult children who are now suddenly dealing with mom not quite being the same way she is, or dad not being able to drive the way he did. And so they have no knowledge. They don't know where the resources are. They don't know where to turn. I mean, time and time again, that's why I really bill my program is information for older adults and their families. And so I figured, well, given the fact that I am a health provider, I might be able to find different experts who can serve as resources. And I've been very, very blessed in terms of not only being able to call up people who are local as experts, physicians, financial planners, other folks that run organizations that can provide resources. And I figured each interview that I do, I strongly encourage people to give their website. What other resources? How can people find the information that you're talking about? Especially now, because my podcast goes all over the country on Apple and Spotify and Red Circle, and I'm also syndicated on Pacifica Network. So I figure I have no idea who's listening, but if they're in Pittsburgh or Michigan or whatever, and they're trying to figure out how they can find a particular resource, that there'll be a website that they can log on to. So it was all of these factors kind of combining, and that's kind of what you want to do as towards the end of your life, is still have some purpose. And I have to tell you that I am very pleased that I still have something that gets me up in the morning.
Oh, and I'm pleased that you're doing it, because you're such a, I'm going to call you a national treasure, Cheryl. I mean, you've really ran the gambit, from public health to, veteran services to being a registered nurse. How long when did Aging Matters start? What year was it?
January of 2017.
Okay.
The radio program started, or the radio station at Arlington Independent Media started in 2016, WERA 96.7 FM. And I used to do all of my programs live. I had a audio producer sitting next to me, and I would do all of my programs. Well, then COVID came, and so everything became online. And so for a while, I had a friend who was also an audio producer that would come over to my house, and he'd be sitting around the corner and I would be interviewing, just like what you're doing with me. And then he went on to other things including law school and becoming a full-time father. And I now work with an audio producer who's located in Richmond, and we do all of our podcasts virtually. And I have to tell you, it's a wonderful way to reach everybody.
Yeah.
I mean, I couldn't have imagined when I first started, when I just had these people who could drive over. And
Yes.
now, my goodness.
Yeah.
I'm sure you find the same thing.
I do. And, I'm going to ask this follow-up question, then I'm going to follow up with what you just said, but I'm going to wait for your answer on this. The show will be 8 years old in just a few months.
Yes.
You must have a favorite guest or a memorable moment that really stands out. When I get asked, out of all of our episodes, who my favorite guest is, I said, that's like asking me who my favorite child is. I just say all of them because I don't want anybody to get upset. But between you and I, and maybe a couple of people that might be listening, do you have a favorite guest or a favorite moment?
I do. And there's a number of them, and I will just
fire away.
Cover them briefly. For one thing, and this was when we were still doing programs live, the program was about organ donation, and I was interviewing the person who is in charge of the organization that oversees organ donation. But she was accompanied by the wife of a Vietnam veteran who had received a donated kidney. And while she did not, her husband, who was the person who had received the donated kidney, preferred not to be on the program. His wife gave an account which was so moving. She talked about how long they had waited for a donated kidney, and that finally they got the call. And in fact, it was somebody who had some kind of health issues, that there would have to be some adjustments in terms of making sure that the kidney would, the man would not be
rejected,
have some kind of reaction. Exactly. But she talked about how they called her up and said, you've got probably about 12 hours to think about it, one way or the other. And so she and her husband talked about it and said, yep, let's do it. And so in Virginia, they drove down to Charlottesville and got the donated kidney. And I was so moved to listen to her story. After the program was over, her husband was sitting in the reception area of Arlington Independent Media. And I went up, and first of all, I said, thank you for your service. And then it was just so moving to meet a man who had a donated kidney. I mean, that was certainly a moving experience. A second program was a woman who I had on earlier on my show, many years earlier. In fact, she was a daily money manager. And then fast forward, she continued to listen to my show. And one day she called me up and said, Cheryl, I was listening to your program. You were talking about a lawyer who was providing information about advanced planning. And she said, I wanted to share with you that he didn't talk about how to transfer like your house and your car if you're dying. And I said, well, that's true. I didn't realize that. She said, well, that's my situation right now. I was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer and I am dying. And so she told me she had been diagnosed a year ago, and that she's been adjusting to life as far as her own personal life, as well as her children. And I said, would you like to be on my program to talk about living while dying? And she said, yes. And that program was probably one of the most dramatic, moving interviews that I've had, to ask her how she felt, and the fact that she's still alive. but how her friends would interact with her, how her family would interact with her. And so Living While Dying was certainly well received by Aging Matters. The final program I just want to share with you, it was less about aging, but more the fact that I interviewed a man named Dr. Terrence Roberts, who was a member of the Little Rock Nine.
Wow.
He was one of the people who was accepted back in, went to school under duress of the
Yeah.
National Guard.
Yeah.
And that story came as a result. My husband and I were on a tour, and we were down in Little Rock. We were visiting other places. In fact, we were visiting presidential museums. But one of the places that we visited was the high school where these 9 Black teenagers were allowed to go to school, and back in the late 50s. And so afterwards, the park ranger that I was talking with, I walked up and I said, "Are these students still alive?" He said, "Oh yeah, 8 of the 9 are still alive." So long story short, I said, "I produce a radio program and I would love to interview one of those students." He said, "I'll put you in touch with Dr. Terrence Roberts, and he lives in California right now, but he's going to be moving to Atlanta." And so I got in touch with him. I asked him if he'd like to be on my show, and he was.
Wow.
And this was in August of 2022. And he told about that experience of living in Little Rock and being discriminated against. And that day when he and his fellow students went to that high school, it was such a moving program.
And it's such a significant part of American history. I mean, that's
exactly.
Yeah.
And to that point, about 2 months later, my husband and I decided to go to Atlanta because we had one more presidential museum to visit. That was the Carter Museum.
Sure. Yeah.
And by that time, Terrence Roberts, Dr. Roberts, was living in Atlanta. And I said, "Could we get together for lunch?" I said, "I'd love to meet you in person." So we did. His wife was ill that day, but he and my husband and I had lunch together in this restaurant in Atlanta. And I have to tell you, I was sitting there thinking, the people around here
I have no idea.
This restaurant have no idea who this man is and what an icon he was. But it just gives me
I just got goosebumps, Cheryl. No, seriously. Yeah.
It was one of the most, memorable interviews that I had ever done.
Oh, yeah. Just out of curiosity, before we move on, because he's such an integral part of American history, you say Little Rock Nine, I immediately know exactly what you're talking about. You say Dr. Terrence Roberts, I have no clue. Why? Yes. Why is that? Is that by his choice?
Well, I always feel, and this is kind of just a personal viewpoint, is that if I'm interviewing somebody who is either a physician or has a PhD, I feel that they deserve respect. Sure. So I call him Dr. Roberts, especially when I'm doing an interview.
Absolutely.
When we talked with him, I did say Terrence as well. But that's more just a personal preference. It probably comes from my nursing background, where we had to be very respectful to physicians.
And I probably didn't ask it the right way. I mean, why doesn't society know who Dr. Terrence Roberts is? That's what I mean. Is that by design? Does he not want the attention, or?
I'm not sure. I think he's kind of moved on. He became a professor out in California, and he's retired now. And he's written several books, which I referred to. So it's kind of like, again, given the fact that he was 17 years old back in the 50s, who remembers?
Okay.
Who people of a certain age remember, just as you did. But if they're younger, there's
being in Michigan, I say Rosa Parks. Everybody knows who she is, even outside of Michigan. Right. And to me, it's a very similar situation, in my opinion. Yes. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but it's very similar in my eye. Yes. So I would think he would have more of more attention and recognition maybe for what he went through, and how important and integral that was in part of desegregating our schools and things like that. I just feel like he should be recognized for that. That's why I didn't know if he didn't want that recognition necessarily, or
I think he's okay with it, but he's
doesn't
also
look for it.
involved in others. And in fact, the irony is that when the three of us had lunch that day, and he was talking about looking for a home in a certain, I don't know, Atlanta suburb, he said it was interesting how the real estate agent was showing him and his wife areas where only Black people were living.
Wow. All these years later, same story. Yeah, it's horrible.
And this was 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And so you think,
yeah,
some things haven't changed yet. So very poignant.
Thank you for sharing those stories, Cheryl. It's just incredible. Before I move on, I'll just want to share a quick one of my favorite memorable stories, and it's
Good,
not.
I'd like to hear it.
And I mean, we've had some wonderful historical people and governors, senators, but for me personally, I felt so connected to this mother's story. And you were talking about, like, with Aging Matters, anybody in the country, you don't know who's listening. It's really the world, right? You probably yeah. We actually had a mother from Australia, and this is a long time ago. She felt so connected with how we treat our guests and, our reputation and things. She wanted to be on the show. Okay, well, what would you like to talk about? She had a son born with Williams syndrome. And the story was, though, what fascinated me as, working in the healthcare industry and also being a father to 3 young children, she never told her son that he was born any different than any other kids in their town. And now this is Australia. They're not big, she wasn't in a big metropolitan area. School teachers never told him. The school never told him. The church never. She did not tell him until he turned 18 that he was born with that. He never had a clue. So Here's where the gray area was for me. And I often think about this. Fortunately, my children were all born very healthy, and I didn't have to make this decision. But as a parent, would I want my child to know? Or would I not want them to know? But then I'm also a son of parents. As the child, would I want my parents to tell me, or would I want to go about not thinking I'm anything different than any other child? I think that's a very interesting question, right?
Yes.
And so, but the fascinating thing was, she had never shared her story in 30 plus years with anyone outside of her family. The first time she shares it is on our show. And that just meant the world to me. And I thought it was a wonderful interview. She sent us some great photos of her son. I recommend everybody watch it. It's a very relatable story for, maybe a parent has cancer. Do you want your wife or husband to know? Do you want your children to know? Do you want your friends to know? Are they going to treat you different? Are people going to look at you differently? Those are things I guess we don't know until we're faced with it.
Yeah. And I think oftentimes too, especially children, if there was some symptoms that the young boy had that were obvious to other children, unfortunately, sometimes kids can be really cruel.
Oh, absolutely. Even if there is no symptoms, kids can just be cruel for, just any reason. So, in talking about topics and things and different conversations with guests, are there any topics or themes that you haven't explored yet, but you're looking forward to covering, or that you really want to, and it's been difficult for one reason or another?
Well, I'm pleased that there's always new things coming up. Folks always say, how do you find your guests and how do you come up with topics? Well, you read the news and you watch television and you find different things. Some I've done before, some I'm going to do. One thing is the idea of philanthropy and aging. What is your legacy and how are you going to do it? How are you going to consider it? In fact, I'm going to have somebody on in a couple of weeks that's going to talk about that, because people are much more cognizant of that as they age, and especially maybe if they don't have children, what do they want to do? So that's a good thing. Another, which I did years ago, was about theater and aging. Older adults enjoy becoming involved in the arts, but I think that there is an element of them actually performing. And I did have somebody on years ago who talked about having a educational TV in which older adults worked with younger people. And I'd like to repeat that because I am finding that after doing this for almost 8 years, whoever I had on before, I can almost have on again and nobody will remember anyway. So, and there might be new things. Another aspect is the whole area of living arrangements. It's much different. Folks are not necessarily staying in their home by themselves. Sometimes they get another roommate, the famous Golden Girls TV show years ago. I think that's becoming more common. Multi-generational situations, or this little separate unit that the old adult children will put on the yard for mom or dad to live in. And I think that it's important for folks to find out that there are more options just than staying by themselves in their home, or maybe going to an extended care facility if they're healthy enough to do that.
Sure.
I think a really important, and I've done a couple of programs already, but I'd like to get into the further about ageism. I think it is so prevalent. And I actually looked this up about ethics and the anti-aging industry. The ethical considerations of working with older adults. I think, again, the younger generation or people, they have these preconceived ideas about older adults, and you see it in the news, you see it on billboards, you see it in magazines, you see it on TV. And is that ethical? I mean, it's more than just advertising and marketing, but what do we need to know? I'd like to get some experts. I think another aspect, and I did do one program, but I'd like to do some more, is artificial intelligence. And how that, and the whole area of new technology. I think that's the thing that strikes me so much about myself. My goodness, I was born in an era where the only kind of communication we had was my mom talked on the phone.
They had a cord.
Yes. We didn't even have a television, black and white, until I was 10. And so the whole area of technology has just mushroomed, and it's so hard. It's not like young people, even like yourself, who took courses in high school or whatever. So you have kind of an innate understanding, as opposed to me, who sits there trying to figure out on the computer how to do something in this. So new technology is tough for older adults, some more than others. Yes, some aren't even on computers and that, and not, and we don't even have to get started on social media and the whole area of scams and things like that. And then I think finally is how we age. I do get a lot of requests from people who I think they have the magic potion for how to stay young or what to do. And I think that's, some of it might be worthwhile, but some folks or authors or providers might have something new in terms of maybe just lifestyle and that, of how, because even I'm sure that you've seen on people, some people are old at 75 and some people are young at 90.
Right.
And how does that happen?
Right.
So those are just a few of the things that I think about.
No, that's wonderful. And, going back to, your ethics and computers and technology and AI, two things there. My grandparents, and that's where really my love for seniors came from. I've been told since I was in high school, I'm an old soul trapped in a young body, which I don't necessarily think that's a bad thing, though. But my grandparents did not live locally. They lived down south. And so from the time I was old enough to leave my parents at an extended period of time, I would go spend 3-4 weeks of my summer with them. It was the best times of my life. And, I have such fondness for that. But my grandmother was a very, proper Southern woman, and she didn't even get her driver's license because that was the man's job, but it wasn't sexist, but that was just kind of the culture. But my grandfather would always bend to whatever my grandmother said too, though. So, let's not get that mistaken. But my grandmother would always say, she says, I'm going to tell you what, this was probably late 80s. She said, I'm going to tell you right now, before long, every single home will have to have a computer in it to function. She said, you will not find a home that doesn't have a computer. And, here we are, you're carrying them around in your hands and briefcase, and they're everywhere. You really have to have your computer, most people, to function properly. During COVID, we became even more reliant on technology. And I don't think we even went back to what it was before COVID now. You and I are talking over Zoom. Like my wife works for a large corporation. She used to go in the office Monday through Friday. Now she gets to work from home 3-4 days a week as long as she has her computer.
Yes.
So it's really changed our lifestyles even more just in the past couple of years.
Right. No, and many older adults, I give them a lot of credit, are really working hard to stay abreast of what's happening, because they realize if they don't, the life is very difficult.
Right. And, one last thing I was going to say, we did, I hosted a 9-person panel about a year and a half ago, and this is one of my most passionate issues, and it's the ethics of dementia and social media. And in fact, just a couple months ago, one of the well-known universities, not Michigan, just so everybody knows, it was outside of Michigan, they actually reached out to us because they were actually writing a research paper on that very issue. And like when we were researching to do that panel, we couldn't find anything online, Cheryl. There's like one obscure article about the ethics of dementia and social media, because the sad thing is, and this is where I was coming from it, you were a nurse, you have to give consent before you can receive care, right? Or you have an advocate that provides the consent, informed consent, whatever you want to call it. If I'm taking care of your mom, you don't know me. I'm just an employee for a home care company, a hospital, or a nursing home. We're not connected on social media, but I'm taking care of your mom. Your mom has advanced dementia or some sort of cognitive issue, and she's acting out or screaming or just whatever it is. Well, I can't wait to show my friends this. They won't believe what I'm dealing with. They record your mom, then they upload it to their social media. There's almost a 0% chance you would ever even know it's on there, but all of her friends and the people she's connected will. There's no safeguards in place to protect people from dementia, from having their likeness or video shared across all these social media platforms, and that's terrifying. But there's safeguards. You upload to YouTube. When you're checking, no, it doesn't contain drugs, alcohol, minors, all these different questions. Why can't they offer one? The people appearing in this video have provided consent to be in the video. It'd be so simple. And we actually sent out academic surveys to LinkedIn and asked everybody, what are your thoughts on this? And you can see where it's such a gray area, right? Some people, it's okay as long as they gave consent. Well, what's consent for a person with dementia? Are they able to give it? But then other people would say, it's okay as long as it's going to be helpful. Well, define helpful, but then it was like 98% said no if this shows a person in any negative light. So you can see it's all over the place, and we need these platforms because they're so powerful and they're so widely used now, and they have so much control. They need to put some safeguards in place, because with our baby boomers and the aging population and the amount of people diagnosed with these cognitive issues, they're not going to ever know if you're videoing them, if you're standing there and recording them, or maybe they don't even see you doing it. And that to me is terrifying, to ever think there's a chance one of my loved ones or someone I care about, or really anybody, could have something put online to live in infamy forever, where it shows them in their worst possible light, And so, yes, ethics is a big issue.
Well, and I just wanted to add something to that, is that on the other end of the spectrum, and I had to learn this early on in terms of aging matters, is that on several occasions, I did have people on my program I interviewed who were in the early stages of dementia. My initial reaction when I was told about this, because I was also going to interview a woman who was the executive director for reinventing dementia and trying to get a different perspective. She said, Cheryl, I'd like to have somebody who has early dementia on the show with with me. And initially I thought, oh, how's that going to work? It was so eloquent
Hmm.
in terms of the person who was in the first case. The woman talked about the fact that she knew she had dementia and she knew what to expect. But it was, again, one of those kinds of interviews that was most memorable. And the second one, which was a couple, I don't know, a year or so later, the guy actually was still doing a radio show.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
so we have to be, aware of the stages of dementia, and that it doesn't mean that somebody is as you just described.
Right, exactly. And I know even that panel, we had a medical doctor on there. She no longer practices, who has dementia. But what about those people who are in the later middle stages who don't remember? It's very troubling. And but I highly recommend anybody who has not watched that to watch, because it's so informative. It's 9 of the leading experts across the world, people from the
Exactly.
UK, Australia, the United States. Reinventing Dementia, is that Lisa Skinner?
I'm not
You
sure. I
remember her
don't
name?
always know all of the experts out there.
No, the
You're
lady you
much more
mentioned,
than.
the woman you mentioned, the Reinventing Dementia. Is that Lisa? Do you remember her
No,
name?
I can't remember her name because it was a couple of years ago.
Okay,
Um, uh, I don't remember.
that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah.
So when you're not doing Aging Matters, what does Cheryl do for a hobby or for fun or to just relax and re-energize?
Well, that exercise I was talking to you about, I need to do that myself. And so the exercise for the most part bores me. So I get on the treadmill and I turn on foreign movies. And the fun part of it is that so that I don't bother my husband, I turn down the sound and I can read the subtitles. So I think I've watched hundreds and hundreds of foreign movies from the Arlington Library,
Oh,
and
nice.
I love it. I find foreign movies much more interesting and, um, well, I guess interesting is the word, because there's much more of a character study of on in foreign movies than these superheroes and these bang bang shoot 'em up kind of American movies. And so that's a part of it. I'm also a board member of the Arlington Neighborhood Village. I'm sure you've heard
Yes.
about the Village movement.
Yes.
And every week I host Coffee and Conversation. It's a Zoom meeting, and I'm chair of the Communications and Marketing Committee and involved with that and other aging kinds of issues here in Washington. I used to be on the Commission on Aging in Arlington County, but I'm a big arts lover. I was a singer for many years. In
Oh,
fact,
yeah.
I performed at the Kennedy Center
Wow.
in a
Okay.
professional a choral group. I performed for about 48 years singing with choral groups. And so that was exciting. Love to read, love to travel. In fact, a little bragging, I have been in all 50 states and 54 countries.
Wow.
So
For
I
you.
love, but my biggest regret is I never learned another language. And I always felt very guilty about that because I thought Americans are very presumptuous when they go to other countries and say, do you speak English? Why do we not speak their language when we go to their country? And I realize that that's hard, but that's one of my biggest regrets that I
Not
didn't
too late,
learn.
Cheryl. It's not too late.
I know. I'll work on that. I'll put that on my to-do list.
How about as we wrap up here, any exciting news or projects on the horizon? This is the way I like to ask guests. When we run into each other one day, Cheryl, and let's say it's 5 years from now, what's going on with you in Aging Matters?
Well, for one thing, I'm excited about the fact that I'm going to start producing TV shows again. And I really want to maybe have a different perspective. I'd like to focus more on patients' lives and caregivers and giving voice to the suffering. I think that there could be new ideas for what people are doing, not only the healthy ones, but ones that aren't so healthy, and figure out what that format might look like in a TV setting, not just cable TV, but others as well. I'm also hearing from physicians who want to create podcasts, that they do want to get closer to people. I interviewed somebody who was talked about mental illnesses a couple of months ago, and he was a psychiatrist. And he said, man, he said, I could do a podcast every week and have people asking me about, a particular issue that they're interested in. So that's possible. And then I think also just looking at research, just as you were talking about, universities and other settings, NIH are looking at aging related research and focusing on what that means, because as our population gets older, more and more new inventions, new situations will come up. And we have these technical possibilities now where people can help to alleviate, whether it's robots or I don't know, other things that might help our aging population stay in their homes longer or whatever. So I'm always looking for new ideas, and yet focusing on traditional ones as well, just to make sure that I, keep saying, educate older adults, their families, and about issues pertaining to aging.
Yeah, wonderful. We're going to have this on the screen throughout the show as well as in the show notes, but where would you like our audience to go to find you and your TV episodes and your podcasts?
Best to go to the website. It's agingmattersonline.com, and it's a pretty easy focus or website to navigate. All of the TV shows are listed, all 40 episodes that I've done so far, and the podcasts are on the podcast page. And if you want to listen to more podcasts, you can look at the bottom of the homepage, and there you can log on to Apple and to Spotify and to Red Circle, and find the programs there. Okay. So, and thank you so much for interviewing me and for showcasing Aging Matters. It was, in fact, I'd like to even throw out the possibility of having you on Aging Matters to talk about what your experience has been. In fact, our little conversation that we had before was wonderful, learning about your history and how you got to be doing what you're doing. And I really congratulate you. You've got quite a following already in terms of and support, and many very interesting programs. I'd love to ask you all the questions that you just asked me.
You can turn it around on me. Absolutely. And you gotta get to if you haven't been there, you gotta come to Michigan or back to Michigan since you've been here before, and go to the Gerald Ford Presidential Museum or Library.
I've been there.
Have you?
Oh yeah. Okay. Yes, and in fact, they have two of them.
Yes.
There's one on Grand Rapids, and the other is
Ann Arbor.
Ann Arbor. Yes.
Yep.
We've done them all 11 of them. Wow. So
that's incredible.
And I have a special fondness for Gerald Ford. He stepped into a pretty
tough situation.
Well said.
Yes. Well, Cheryl Beversdorf, thank you so much, host and producer of Aging Matters and military nurse and veteran. Thank you so much for all you're doing.
And thank you for all that you're doing as well. And until the next time.
Yes, ma'am. Have a good day, Cheryl. Bye-bye.
You do the same. Bye-bye.
Thank you for joining us today here at All Home Care Matters. All Home Care Matters is here to help families as they navigate these long-term care issues. We invite you to visit us at allhomecarematters.com, where there's a private, secure, fillable form where you can give us feedback, show ideas, or if you have questions. Every form is read and responded to. And remember, you can listen to the show on any of your favorite podcast streaming platforms, or you can watch the show on our official YouTube channel. Just make sure that you hit that subscribe button so that you never miss an episode. We'd also like to say thank you again to Cheryl Beversdorf for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you next time here at All Home Care Matters.
Thank you for joining us today. We look forward to you joining us again on another episode of All Home Care Matters. To learn more about the show and to connect with us, visit us at allhomecarematters.com.